My mother slapped me across the face for writing "okay" in my mood log. Then she said, "How dare you be twice as happy as the woman who gave up everything for you?" Years later, when I brought it up and asked if she understood the damage she'd done, she smirked. "Happy children become broken adults. I saved you," she said. I just stared at her. That was 16 months ago. This morning, she saw something on her phone, froze completely, and hasn't touched food since. She built her life on denying joy, not just for herself, but for me too. For as long as I can remember, my mother, Marlene, had an obsessive need to make me miserable. To carry this out, she invented the mood log system. Every hour, we were required to log how we felt. We'd compare our numbers at the end of the day, and if I ever reported being happier than she was, she'd punish me until our scales aligned. Marlene believed happiness was a lie, something people clung to just before the world crushed them. She had grown up wealthy and beautiful, had it all, and then lost everything when my dad left her for his assistant. Instead of healing, she decided her pain gave her insight I needed to learn if I was to survive life. She saw my natural optimism as a weakness, a liability that would betray me like hers had betrayed her. "Happy children become broken adults," she'd warn, watching me giggle with my friends like I was about to set myself on fire. After my father left, she made it her personal mission to make sure I never tasted joy. The day after he moved out, she gave me 2 leather-bound journals and a laminated chart. "We're going to track our happiness every hour," she declared, showing off a scale from 1 to 10. "At the end of each day, we'll compare. Your number can never be higher than mine." She had already given herself a 3 for the day, due to the divorce. I, not understanding the danger, marked down a 6. I was relieved the fighting was over. Marlene saw my number and slapped me. "How dare you be twice as happy as the woman who gave up everything for you?" That night, I went to bed hungry, my first punishment for feeling okay. The mood logs consumed our lives. Each morning she'd rate herself a 2 or a 3, depending on how bad her dreams were, then hide the number and wait for mine like a predator. If I matched or went lower, she'd nod and start breakfast. But if I scored even a single point higher, she'd punish me on the spot. Cancelled outings, confiscated books, broken possessions, all while explaining how much harder her life had been than mine. Eventually, I started logging only 1s, figuring that would be safe. But she caught on. "You want to know what living at a 1 feels like?" she said, dragging me into the basement. "I'll show you a 1. After that, I learned to read her like a survival skill. Puffy eyes meant she'd be at a 3, so I had to write a 2. Sunshine might lift her to a 4, letting me log a 3 safely. But I never knew when she'd plummet without warning. A parking ticket could send her spiraling to a 1. Then she'd rush home to inspect my last entry. If I was even slightly above her, she'd snap. The worst part was watching her sabotage her own happiness just to keep me from rising. She turned down jobs, cut off friends, and refused invitations, anything that might improve her mood and allow me to feel better. When her sister invited us for Christmas, she declined. "Too many happy families," she said. "It would ruin our numbers." We were drowning, but she was the one holding us both under. I didn't know how to make her let go, so I gave her what she wanted: misery. I began logging 0s, not 1s, not 2s. Just pure 0s, with explanations. 0 because I want to disappear. 0 because I dream of you dying. 0 because I haven't felt joy in years. She begged me to stop. 0 isn't a valid number, she'd say. But when she punished me for writing it, I told her she was making me feel even worse and threatened to dip into the negatives. 2 straight weeks of 0s made her panic. She started inflating her own numbers, suddenly scoring 4s and 5s, hoping to grant me permission to rise. I refused. 0, 0, 0. Then she tried bribing me with gifts, privileges. I stayed at 0. So she pivoted. "We'll be 0 together." She quit her job, stopped paying bills, let the house decay. "You want 0? I'll give you 0, she said, shredding my college applications and tossing my acceptance letters. She let the house rot. No food, no hygiene. She started self-harming, cuts on her arms, blood on the sink. "What's your number now?" she'd ask. "Still think you're as low as I am?" But I'd learned from the master. I looked at her wounds and wrote, 0. "Because you're doing this to yourself." She wanted to break me, wanted me to admit that I was happier. I refused. I would rather die at 0 than give her that win. One morning she stumbled into the kitchen where I sat, mood log open. Her hair was greasy, her arms covered in healing scars. She snatched my journal, flipping through pages filled with zeros and increasingly dark notes. Her hands trembled. She grabbed her own journal and furiously scribbled 10. The woman who said happiness was a delusion now claimed perfect bliss while bleeding in a filthy kitchen. I picked up my pen. 0. She lunged across the table, tore the pen from my grip, and began writing in my journal. 7, 8, 9. She filled entire hours with fake numbers, her handwriting unraveling. I let her finish. Then I took the pen, crossed out every single entry, and replaced them with zeros. She screamed and swept the table clean, journals, dishes, everything crashing to the floor. Then she knelt, bleeding from a broken plate, and started picking up the shards with bare hands. I walked away. An hour later, she came to my door with bandaged palms and a new plan: therapy. A specialist, she said, who could fix my emotional flatness. Dr. Candace's office smelled like vanilla and denial. She'd clearly been jumped straight to questions about my zeros. Why do you rate yourself so low? Don't you see how it affects your mother? I stayed silent. Marlene filled the hour with lies about how difficult I'd always been, how the logs were for communication. Dr. Candace nodded, scribbled notes. At the end, she handed me a new chart with smiley faces instead of numbers. Sometimes visuals help. I crossed out every face and handed it back. 3 sessions a week I attended in silence. After a month, Dr. Candace suggested individual appointments. Marlene refused. I need to make sure she tells the truth. But the truth was this: Marlene had created a prison where honesty meant pain and lying meant survival. She weaponized feelings, and she wondered why I had none. Therapy became another battleground where she tried to force me to admit I felt something, anything above 0. I started leaving my log in obvious places. The zeros marched down the page like tombstones, each one a rebellion. She found them, annotated in the margins. Please stop. I'm trying to help you. But she wasn't. She wanted to win. She threw parties with relatives I hadn't seen in years. I sat stone-faced. 0. She left expensive gifts on my bed. I donated them. 0. She got a puppy thinking I couldn't resist. I fed it, walked it, logged zeros as it licked my face. Every attempt, I resisted. Zeros became my armor. She escalated again. Surprise visits at school, dragging me out of class for appointments that were just drives around town where she sobbed and begged me to write anything but 0. Please, she whispered once, just a 4, just a 4. I stared out the window and planned my escape. College was the only path out, but she'd burned the acceptance letters. So I found another way. I researched community colleges, forged her signature on financial aid forms, and had everything sent to Ms. Whitaker's classroom, my favorite teacher, who'd kept her door open late so I'd have somewhere to be after school. Ms. Whitaker never asked why. She just kept the space safe. Marlene must have sensed what I was planning because she descended into full-on chaos. She stopped therapy, diverted the money to psychics, crystal healers, life coaches. One guru told her my energy pathways were blocked. I sat through every session, stone still, logging zeros. The journals became monuments to our mutual destruction, hers wild swings between performative 10s and authentic ones, mine a flatline of defiance. Her last desperate act? She burned every mood log in the backyard, a black column of smoke rising as if she could incinerate the past. Then she handed me a fresh journal. Clean slate, she said. Let's pretend the zeros never happened. But I didn't need to pretend. They had happened, and they had saved me. While she tried to erase the damage, I'd been quietly building a life she couldn't touch. Secret savings accounts, digital backups of my real college documents, friends ready to let me crash if I needed to flee. Those zeros weren't despair. They were resistance. I took the new journal and wrote my first entry, 0, because that's what she taught me I was worth, and I'd turned it into power. She wanted me blank, so I became untouchable. The tragic part? I think some piece of her did love me, but she twisted it into something venomous. She thought if she hurt me first, I'd be inoculated against the world's pain. She became the heartbreak she feared I'd someday face. I kept writing zeros because they were the only honest thing left. Any other number would be a lie, a performance, a surrender. 0 was truth. One morning, she saw the latest 0 and lost it. She grabbed my journal, hurled it across the kitchen, then chased it down, smoothing the pages with trembling fingers. The puppy whimpered from the corner, confused and afraid. She vanished into her room and re-emerged with old photo albums, family vacations, birthday parties, baby pictures with frosting on my cheeks. She spread them across the table, tapping my smiling face with a bandaged finger, leaving tiny red smears on the glossy photos. Her eyes begged me to remember joy. I picked up my pen. 0, note, pictures of someone who used to be me. She swept the albums onto the floor and stormed out. Through the window, I watched her stomp through the yard, scattering ashes from the burned journals like some twisted ritual. The next wave of her campaign began immediately. She called relatives I barely remembered and orchestrated visits without asking. My Aunt Georgia came first, armed with casseroles and fake concern. While Marlene hovered behind her mouthing prompts, Aunt Georgia talked about her kids, their smiles, their milestones. She showed photos and waited for my envy. I nodded politely and excused myself to log a 0. More followed. Uncles who asked about sports, cousins I hadn't seen in years, my grandmother crying into tea asking what had happened to her bright little Haley. Marlene directed it all like a stage play, positioning players for maximum emotional pressure. Then she brought up my guitar, the one I hadn't touched since the logs began. My uncle strummed familiar chords. She stared at me, willing the music to crack my shell. I listened, silent, then went upstairs and wrote another 0. The next crash came quickly. I heard the guitar smash against the wall minutes later. Then came the old friends. Classmates from before the mood logs ruined everything. She'd coached them to act normal. We sat awkwardly in the living room while they recounted stories I couldn't laugh at anymore. One of them, Lena, brought old photos, us in face paint, at the school carnival, smiling. Marlene buzzed like a wire. Lena spread the photos out like an offering. I thanked her for coming, then showed her out. The sensory flood began after that. Lasagna baking, cookies cooling on the counter, the smell of warm bread filled the house, comfort foods from another life. I ate in silence and logged 0s between bites. She played movies we once loved. I sat through them expressionless. She watched me instead of the screen. Her laughter sounded forced, like it hurt to push out. Music followed, songs from my childhood, old pop hits, even lullabies. The soundtrack of her desperation filled the house. I moved through it like fog. The puppy became her last real weapon. It brought me toys, curled in my lap, tried to lick joy into me. I cared for it, but not in ways she could see. The 0s didn't stop. Then came gifts, carefully placed. Paint sets I used to love, books I'd once devoured, stylish clothes from my pre-log life. Each one included a note asking me to rate how I felt receiving it. I donated them unopened and logged another 0. She began to unravel, stopped eating properly, lived on coffee and impulse. Her hair turned brittle. The scars on her arms itched, and I'd catch her tracing them when she thought I wasn't looking. A meditation teacher came. We sat cross-legged while he led breathing exercises. Marlene's eyes stayed open, watching me instead of closing her own. I breathed, then logged 0. A nutritionist followed. Supplements, anti-inflammatory meals. I swallowed every pill, ate every dish, logged 0s the whole way through. 2 weeks later, the woman gave up. She turned to faith next. Church, synagogue, Buddhist temple. She dragged me through each one. People prayed over me, spoke of salvation and peace. I sat through it all, nodded when appropriate, then wrote 0. She organized interventions groups of concerned adults huddled in the living room. Teachers, old neighbors, relatives. They all pleaded for me to feel something. Marlene cried on cue. I sat still, nodded occasionally, and logged my 0 after they left. One by one, they stopped coming. She took to filming me making home movies of my numbness. She'd show them back to me later. Look how empty you are, she'd whisper, rewinding the footage like it held secrets. Dance therapy came next. Ballet had once been my favorite thing. She hired an instructor. I stood at the bar, followed the steps with perfect technique. My face stayed blank. The woman left early, then came exposure therapy, though she never called it that. Surprise visits to childhood haunts, unexpected reunions, songs, sights, smells, hoping to trigger something, anything. She failed every time. I existed like a ghost, present but unreachable. Eventually, she started sleeping outside my door, not out of love, out of fear that I'd hurt myself, but the zeros weren't about pain, they were about control. I stepped over her each morning and made sure she saw what I logged. 0. She pivoted again, this time to athletics, signed me up for soccer, swim, track. Endorphins, she muttered like a spell. She came to every practice, every meet, eyes glued to my face for signs of life. I performed exactly as expected, ran fast, swam well, then logged zeros in the locker room. Her sister started visiting more often. I'd hear them in the kitchen whispering phrases like professional help and inpatient program. Marlene always emerged tighter wound than before, more determined to fix me herself. She tried letting go, made a dramatic display of throwing away the mood charts. "We're free now," she said. "No more logging." But I caught her later that night, rifling through my journal. Her face when she saw another 0 looked like something had died inside her. 3 days later, the charts were back. Her bribes grew grander, a full room makeover, a car for my 16th, a vacation anywhere I wanted, all of it laced with conditions. I declined everything and logged another 0. She signed us up for activities meant to build joy, pottery, cooking classes, a weekend camping trip. We shaped clay side by side, rolled pasta by hand, slept beneath stars. I participated fully, spoke politely, then logged zeros all the same. She turned to literature books on trauma, healing, emotional regulation, highlighted passages, left them open on my bed, recovery memoirs, neuroscience, spiritual guides, all bookmarked to relevant sections. I moved them aside and wrote 0. Our house transformed into a cluttered graveyard of failed attempts, canvas sets unopened, gift books gathering dust, therapy tools abandoned in corners. The puppy now grown tiptoed through the wreckage like it understood we were living inside a collapsed building. One night, I walked into the kitchen to find her curled on the floor, holding an unopened journal, sobbing soundlessly. She tried shock tactics next. Fire alarms at 3 a.m., loud banging, sudden screaming, fake emergencies. I adapted quickly. Steady breath, blank face, 0. Her logs stopped pretending. She scribbled 10s while weeping, 1s while euphoric. Wildly inconsistent numbers, shown to me like courtroom evidence. See? Numbers don't mean anything. I nodded, then logged my 0. School started to suffer. Not my grades, but the interference. She emailed my teachers, asking them to report if I smiled. Ms. Whitaker began shielding me, intercepting messages, buffering her chaos. Marlene got desperate. She contacted my father. He showed up looking uncomfortable, guilt heavy in his posture. They sat me down between them, awkward co-parents trying to drag feelings out of me. The evening ended with them screaming at each other while I quietly logged another 0 upstairs. Then she started a blog. Raising the Emotionally Numb Teenager. She read internet comments aloud at dinner, tried every suggestion. Aromatherapy, color therapy, sound baths. The house turned into a live-in Pinterest board of half-failed healing hacks. Then came physical manipulation. She'd grab my face and try to shape it into a smile. She tickled me, desperate for laughter. I stayed limp, learned to still my reflexes. Her sister finally staged an intervention, but this time for Marlene. She showed up with brochures for treatment facilities, pleaded with her to go. Marlene screamed, threw the pamphlets out the window. I don't need help. She does. Through my window, I watched my aunt cry in her car before driving away. The zeros were no longer just armor. They were a manifesto, a refusal, a lifeline. She had taught me that happiness was a sin, that joy meant punishment. I'd simply absorbed the lesson too well, become the monster she was trying to prevent. She tried one last therapist, a woman who worked with selectively mute teens. I wasn't mute, but Marlene insisted I was emotionally silent. The therapist tried everything: art therapy, role play, even guided hypnosis. I cooperated fully, drew dark shapes, stayed still, logged my zeros afterward. Then the desperation took a new shape. She started waking me in the middle of the night. "Did you dream something good?" she whispered, flashlight in hand. "Did you feel anything?" She hid my journal to see if I'd panic. I didn't. She filled out fake logs for me, forging joy in my handwriting. I erased them. The house deteriorated around us. Peeling paint, dead plants, bills collecting dust. She was unemployed now, too deep into her obsession to work. The dog remained the only healthy thing in our home. I fed it, walked it, took it to the vet. It became the only relationship in my life untouched by manipulation. Then came my 17th birthday. Marlene decorated the house like we were normal, invited relatives, ordered a cake. Just before guests arrived, she knelt on the kitchen floor and actually begged for me to fake it. Just for today, just for them. I looked at the wreckage, at her trembling hands, at the life she'd burned down in the name of protecting me. She had tried to save me from pain by becoming the pain. I said nothing. At the party, I sat still while people sang. I didn't eat the cake, didn't open the gifts. The dog hid under the couch, the tension too thick to ignore. After they left, she collapsed at the table, looked around at the crumbs, the empty seats, the unopened presents. Then she pulled out her mood log, wrote something, and pushed it across the table. 10, it said, because I destroyed my daughter. I picked up my pen. 0, I wrote, because you did. The gap between us had never felt wider. She rose slowly and went to her room. The next morning, I heard movement, decisive, foreign. She was packing, suitcases by the door, trips back and forth to the car. I watched, stunned, as she peeled her life off the walls and folded it into bags. At one point, she stopped outside my room, looked in, opened her mouth, closed it again, then turned away. The dog followed her, confused. By noon, she was gone. The house felt cavernous without her clutter. She left the mood log chart on the kitchen counter. I watched her drive away through the window. She didn't look back. That afternoon, I began to clean. Not the frantic, bloodied cleaning Marlene did when spiraling, but careful, deliberate restoration. I threw out the forgotten gifts, the broken therapy tools, the ghosts of failed attempts at control. Slowly, the house began to reappear beneath the rubble. That evening, Ms. Whitaker called. Marlene had reached out to her, asked her to check in on me. I told her I was fine, that there was food, that I could manage. She insisted on stopping by anyway. I didn't say no. She came with groceries and sat with me at the kitchen table, helping sort through the avalanche of overdue bills and final notices. The mess was serious, but not beyond repair. She helped me call utility companies, set up payment plans, made lists of what could be salvaged. Over the next few days, I created routines. Wake up, feed the dog, go to school, come home. No mood logs, no hourly assessments, no punishments for simply existing. The silence was strange. At first, it felt like walking through a vacuum. But slowly, it became peace. Marlene's sister called repeatedly. I let the machine pick up. She left message after message, asking where her sister had gone, whether I was all right if I needed help. On the 5th message, I answered, told her Marlene had left, that I was managing. She demanded to visit. I said okay. She brought more groceries and a fire in her eyes. She needed to understand. I showed her the logs, what remained of them, the handwriting, the rules, the destruction carefully recorded over years. She turned the pages like they were cursed. Why, would she leave these behind when she packed everything else? She asked, voice cracking. Did she mean for me to see this? We went through Marlene's old desk drawers, found medical forms, blog printouts, psychiatric evaluations, and dozens of comments from strangers validating her obsession. My aunt went pale. She wanted me to come live with her. I refused. The house was mine now, paid for. Dad's support check still arrived. I'd be 18 in less than a year. I could finish high school here, keep the routine I'd fought so hard to create. She reluctantly agreed, on the condition we check in daily. I said yes. School became easier. Teachers stopped tiptoeing around me. Ms. Whitaker no longer had to screen messages from my mother. I still stayed after school most days, helping her grade papers or organize books. We didn't talk much. The silence was mutual comfort. The dog adjusted faster than I did. It stopped checking the door after a week. Our rhythm solidified: walks, meals, quiet evenings, a small healing life. Sometimes I reached for my journal out of habit. My hand would float over empty space, searching for what was no longer required. I never replaced it. My father called once, stiff, cautious. Said Marlene had contacted him, rambling about zeros and how she'd failed. He asked if I needed anything, if I wanted to come stay. I said I was okay. He didn't press. My aunt hired a lawyer and helped me file for legal emancipation. With Marlene gone and documentation of the mood log system in hand, my case was solid. The lawyer called it one of the clearest examples of emotional coercion he'd seen. I found the old acceptance letters stuffed in a shoebox in Marlene's closet, hidden but preserved. Some offers had expired, but community college was still an option. I started researching application deadlines. With Marlene gone, the house felt breathable. I could laugh at a TV show without scrutiny, smile without risk, simply exist without explanation. Sarah, my old friend, reached out through Ms. Whitaker. She wanted to reconnect. We met for coffee. It was awkward at first, but after a while we slipped into our old rhythm. She told me how disturbing those reunion visits had been, how obviously coached they'd felt, how sorry she was. Others followed, quietly rebuilding friendships that Marlene's system had severed. Most had sensed something was wrong. They just hadn't known how to help. Now, without the constant interference, we had space to start over. My aunt found me a therapist who specialized in emotional abuse and family trauma, a woman named Dr. Yoon. No one coached her. No one watched or listened. She was just there. For the first time I spoke about the mood logs, about the zeros, about how they became my shield, my protest, my power. She listened. She didn't try to fix me, just helped me understand. The zeros had served their purpose. They'd broken the system Marlene created. But I didn't need them anymore. I didn't need to perform numbness to protect myself. I didn't need to perform anything at all. Winter came, and Marlene didn't. Her sister received a few postcards from different cities, vague musings about healing and finding peace. She never asked about me. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she was still at -10. I redecorated slowly, turned the old war rooms back into neutral spaces. The kitchen table became my study zone. The living room, once the stage for interventions, now felt calm. The dog and I had our routines: morning walks before school, evening laps around the neighborhood, late nights curled up on the couch. We took care of each other. Two survivors of a war we hadn't started. My 18th birthday passed without drama. My aunt offered a party. I declined. Instead, I submitted college applications, quietly, on my terms. A week later, the court finalized my emancipation. The judge reviewed the logs, the notes, the testimony, then signed the document that severed me from parental control. I walked out with paperwork in hand and tears I didn't try to suppress. Spring arrived with a community college acceptance letter. No fanfare, no sabotage, just a plain envelope with a fresh beginning. I started community college that spring. Just a few general education courses, nothing overwhelming. I was free to choose now, but after so many years of having my every decision monitored, I moved slowly, carefully, one class at a time. The freedom felt massive and fragile, like a new language I was still learning to speak. Marlene never returned. Her sister forwarded the occasional postcard, one from Austin, another from Portland. The messages were vague and impersonal notes about yoga retreats or roadside diners. Not once did she ask how I was doing. Not once did she apologize. Maybe she couldn't face what she'd done. Maybe she still believed in the system she'd built. Or maybe she knew it had finally destroyed her too. I kept one box tucked high on the shelf in my closet. Inside were the final logs, her last one, marked 10, and mine, the 0 that followed. I opened it sometimes, not to relive the pain, but to remember how far I'd come, how deliberate my survival had been. The house continued to change. I painted over the faded chart on the kitchen wall, replaced the laminated rules with photos of me and the dog at the lake. The living room grew cozy again, filled with books and plants and music that didn't have to mean anything. No ulterior motives, no forced responses. I got used to waking up without being assessed, used to laughing at something dumb on TV and not having to log it, used to feeling things without grading them. Sarah and I became real friends again. She invited me to join her study group. Eventually, we shared notes, inside jokes, even late-night texts that didn't end in emotional surveillance. Other friends returned too, some slowly, some clumsily, but genuinely. The difference now was that I knew what healthy looked like. I could tell the difference between care and control, between support and manipulation. My aunt visited regularly. She never tried to take over. She respected my space, my independence. She brought groceries sometimes, or helped me fix things around the house. Occasionally, she'd sit with me at the kitchen table and say nothing. Just be there. It was enough. Dr. Yoon helped me dismantle the remnants of Marlene's voice in my head. The one that still whispered that happiness was dangerous, that joy meant weakness, that the world punished contentment. She reminded me that feelings are like weather. They come and go. They don't need to be analyzed or ranked or earned. They just are. I didn't keep mood logs anymore. But sometimes I'd catch myself wondering, if I were to write a number now, what would it be? And then I'd remember, I didn't have to. That was the miracle. Not the absence of pain, not constant joy, but the ordinary freedom of not having to justify my experience to anyone. The dog aged alongside me, now graying at the muzzle, still loyal. It was the one creature who'd never asked me for proof of emotion. It simply showed up, and I returned the favor. Eventually, I graduated from community college and transferred to a university. My aunt helped me move into the dorms. No drama, no sabotage, just boxes and hugs and pride in her eyes. As we unpacked, she found the final log in one of my bags, the one with Marlene's, 10, and my last 0. She looked at me carefully and asked if I wanted to throw it away. I shook my head. It's not for her anymore, I said. It's for me, a reminder of what I survived, of what I chose. Because that's what the zeros had been all along, not silence, not surrender. They were resistance, armor, a signal fire from the edge of emotional collapse. And when the time came, I set them down. The girl who had written all those zeros had saved herself. She had turned absence into presence, numbness into strength, nothing into everything. She had walked through hell and drawn a map so I could get out. Now I live without scores, without hourly check-ins, without the weight of someone else's fear wrapped around my joy. Some days are bright, some are dull, some are just quiet. All of them are mine, and that is the real victory, not that I won, not that she lost, but that I walked away with myself intact. I chose truth over obedience, presence over performance, and in doing so, I reclaimed something she never intended me to have, my life, unscored, unmeasured, free.